I'm going to make myself a new toolbox. My initial design was straightforward, logical, and most of all, it didn't look like it was going to give me a headache for the entire build. But luckily, that problem was quickly rectified when I had a fever dream of a handle that would pop out when you press a button, twist 90 degrees, and come out of the toolbox. And then you could push it back and kind of load up the system again. I'm using maple because it's a very strong wood, but unlike exotic woods, it doesn't have a tendency of splitting on the grain. I'm laying out the geometry for the guide pins with a height gauge and a V-block. You could just as well do it with a couple of wood blocks, but having the right tools takes out some potential for error. I need all 6 of these holes to match up perfectly, so after having drilled the first hole, I use a pin to locate both parts. To center the layout line, I simply use a pair of dividers and referenced it to the vice jaws. Now I have to cut a partial spiral in the router with a helical bit. It's going to be for the guide pins to follow, but it's not going to be simple. I drew 4 lines on a piece of wood to see where I am. Between the first 2, I just have to pull out straight. Between the second 2, I have to turn 90 degrees. And between the last 2, I continue to just pull out straight. This operation was not only difficult, but also really stressful. A single mistake meant I had to make the whole part again. There's no second try. The result wasn't incredible. Any worse than this and I'd probably have restarted the part. I then cleaned up the slot a little bit because the next slots are going to be modeled directly after this one. The idea here is really to make the helix as smooth and consistent as possible. Small inconsistencies could create a lot of friction. To perfectly copy the first slot, all I have to do is put a guide pin in that one and follow it for the next ones. The final result isn't too bad, and with a little finishing, it's pretty good. To reduce the wood-on-wood friction, I used a lot of wax. Usually I just rub the wax on, but this time I wanted the wax to really penetrate into the wood since I won't be able to add more wax later on. To be able to taper the hole in the handle, I spun it on the lathe. The entire weight of this toolbox is going to be relying on this single through tenon, so it has to be really strong. I also made some last minute dimensional changes to the tenon, which led to this peculiar setup. For the finish, I chose laxatives, or mineral oil if you prefer. The nice thing about non-hardening oil finishes is that if you get a scratch, the oil is just going to kind of seep back in and repair the scratch, which is wonderful for a toolbox that's going to get knocked up. And of course, I engraved my logo onto this toolbox in case I forget that I made this toolbox, I guess. What I created here is a pivot point that doesn't actually use a single pin in it. This way it's a lot stronger, and it also allows for linear movement throughout the pivoting of this joint. I didn't film a lot of the making of the mechanism to release a handle because it's a lot of really small, fine work that's just really nothing notable. One of the things I dislike about YouTube is having to explain the reasons why I do the projects that I do. Possibly that's because most of my projects are overly complicated because that's how I don't know, entertain myself. And well, yeah, that's kind of the answer once again. This project could have been simply a handle that folds to the side like your traditional toolbox, but I just wanted to make things really complicated, and the handle needed to go in, so it works. What the external mechanism is doing is simply relaying the pressure from the button, which then pushes on a lever, which in turn pulls the latch that releases the spring pressure from the system. The pins that slide in a helical groove then turns the handle 90 degrees as it goes up, and just like that, you're left with this. And now all that's left is making the actual toolbox, which isn't really simpler than this, but it's going to be its own video. Wow, you made it to the end. I'd give you a crisp high five to thank you, but technology just really isn't quite there yet. You can like this video though, and even subscribe if you're up to it. It's a pretty cool feature YouTube has, so